to Code Decode. Today in this video, we're going to cover some Accenture first round interview questions. One of our colleague is in process of giving interviews to multiple different companies. He has cleared Accenture, so we have thought of creating a database of all the questions that he has been asked in the interviews. It will be helpful for us. There might be some simple, there might be some difficult questions, but that's how the first round goes for Accenture. So let's get started.
Please like, share and subscribe to support us, and we are setting a like target of 500 likes.
Can you tell me something about your project? I'm not going to cover that in this video because every project is different. Every person has a different project. You should know how to explain your project. If you want me to summarize this, what all things you should cover while explaining this part to the interviewer in the summarized format in the most efficient way, you have to let me know in the comment section. Then I will cover this kind of questions and on what all touch points you have to cover while answering such kind of questions. We'll move to the next one. Can one of my colleagues please help me in mocking this particular interview questions?
Yes. Okay. So, what is concurrent HashMap?
Okay. So, concurrent HashMap is a thread-safe version of a hash map available in Java. It was introduced only after Java 1.5 and was part of concurrent package. The underlying data structure for this particular concurrent hash map is Hashtable only.
Okay. So, why was it introduced if synchronized version of HashMap is already present as Hashtable?
Correct. So, we all know that Hashtable is synchronized. And the concurrent hash map has came into picture to increase the performance of hash table, because the hash table, while performing some updations, the whole hash table is being locked. But in the case of concurrent hash map, the segment locking is the concept that came into picture, and that is why concurrent hash map came into picture as a concurrent package, and we are not going to use hash table because it is very bad in performance.
Can you please tell me how it works internally?
Sure. So, as already told, concurrent hash map works on the segment locking purpose. What happens here is the whole concurrent hash map object is divided into multiple segments. Now, before going into the internal working, I'll be explaining three major concepts of the concurrent hash map, which actually goes as the arguments in the constructor. The first is a concurrency level, which is the number of concurrent threads that can work upon different segments in the concurrent hash map to work simultaneously to increase the performance, which was not allowed in hash table earlier. The default concurrency level is 16. That means 16 concurrent threads can work simultaneously on a concurrent hash map together. Second is the load factor, which is a threshold which is used for controlling the size, and the default is 0.75. That means if the default is 16, the size is 16, and whenever the 0.75 of 16, that is 12, size is reached, the concurrent hash map is going to grow its size to accommodate more such elements. That is the load factor. The third is the initial capacity, which is the number of elements it can hold into it. The by default capacity of concurrent hash map is 16. That means it will have 16 entries stored. That means if the concurrency level is 16 and the initial capacity is 16, that means each segment is going to have just one object into it. Now, going forward towards the internal working of it, in a multi-threading environment, a thread can read any number of times it wants from the concurrent hash map without any lock. But while updating it, there can be a dirty read situation. That is why a segment locking concept came into picture, where only a particular bucket is locked at a time when one particular thread is working. So simultaneously, 16 concurrent threads can update the 16 segments in the concurrent hash map. But if a chance comes that two threads want to update a same segment, then one has to wait, because a segment is locked. Until the segment locking is not removed, the second thread cannot work upon it. Internally, again, you have two methods, the put method and get method. These two methods are completely same as hash map. Just the difference comes is not just the complete hash map is divided into multiple buckets, but it is also divided into multiple segments. So first, the segment index is calculated, and then in that particular segment, the bucket location is calculated. So there will be two steps now. First, a hash code generation, which will be used to define the segment index, and then the same hash code will be used to decide the particular index inside the segment where you are going to put that particular element. Same with the get method, hash code is calculated. The hash code is used to calculate the segment index, and then inside the segment index, the same key is used to fetch the value inside the segment in that particular index. So that was all about the internal working of concurrent hash.
Okay, so my next question is how to make a list as read-only list.
To make a particular list a read-only list, we can use the collections unmodifiable list method. This method takes an argument, your list which is completely modifiable, and will return you a read-only list where you cannot manipulate anything. So I'm going to use the collections.unmodifiable list method for this.
Okay. Can you tell about what is Java Reflection API?
Okay. So at runtime, we always have an access to objects, but we do not have access to the blueprint of that object that is called a class. Now, if you want to know something about the class, its members, its variable, its name, its fields, its constructor, at runtime, there was no other way than the Java reflection. So Java reflection was a process to analyze and modify the class at the runtime and not the object. So this is one of the biggest advantage of reflection API, that it can even manipulate the private members of the class too. And all the required classes are present in the java.lang.reflect package.
Okay. What are the advantages of Reflection API?
Okay, so it is a very powerful way to manipulate dynamically your code at runtime. This kind of feature was not available in conventional languages like Pascal, C, Fortran, C++. So Java has this advantage of manipulating your code at runtime. Secondly, it helps you to introspect and debug your classes and objects, which help you in understanding how this actually code works internally. It also provides a way to modify and access your methods and annotations, which can be helpful while creating the custom adapters and decorators. Debugging and testing is also advantage of reflection to examine the private members of a class which you might not have been able to access because these were private initially.
Okay. Uh, Please also state the disadvantages of Reflection API.
Okay, so the reflection API initially is not thread safe. That means when you have multiple threads coming together, then you need to understand which particular thread is using the same class which is loaded at the same time. It can cause dirty reads and wrong manipulations at the runtime. So it's not thread safe and hence it's not recommended in multi-threaded moment. Secondly, it is a performance overhead, because when you try to get inside the class at the runtime in a dynamic way, the performance becomes slower, the operations become slower, and hence when you're not using reflection, it's much better. So just avoid them in a performance sensitive applications. And lastly, we always use something called as abstraction. Now you have created a method or a variable private because you don't want to see that at runtime. Now reflection gives you an option to go and seek into it, which was not initially decided. So you are actually degrading the behavior of how the platform was created earlier. So please do not use the reflection, avoid it as much as possible.
Okay. So my next question is, what is the difference between serializable and externalizable interfaces?
Okay. In serializable, most of the task is given to JVM, and it is a task of JVM to serialize each and every variable and properties present in your class to a particular file or a database. Now, what happens is, if I have 10 number of or hundreds number of variables, all are being going to be serialized to a particular network database or file. I want some customization to such kind of serialization process. At that point of time, I need externalizable. Now, suppose there are 100 variables. I just want to serialize 2 and rest all I don't want to serialize. So, I just don't want to put 98 times the transient annotation to prevent the serialization of such variables. At that point of time, I'll be using the externalizable in my project. The externalizable interface is not a marker interface. Like serialization is a marker interface, externalization is not a marker interface. It defines two methods, the write external and read external, which tells explicitly the JVM which to serialize and which not to serialize. What I find is serialization, it has a very bad performance because everything has to be done by JVM and it will do everything step by step. But in externalization, you have the chance to make the performance better by serializing only those what is required and modifying it the way you want. Then it is hard to modify the structure because any change in the structure might break your serialization process, but it is relatively easier to modify and analyze your own class structure and have a complete control over it, because here JVM will not take a complete control on your serialization process in externalization. And lastly, the transient keyword is not that important in externalizable, because you explicitly decide what is to be serialized in the right external method of the externalizable interface. While it plays a very important role in serializable, because that is only way to tell JVM which is to be stored in the table, stored in the file, and which not to. And also the partial saving of object is not possible in serializable. All the objects and everything will be saved into a file, while it can be, the partial saving of the object is possible only in externalizable, because it is customized serialization where the hold is given to you.
Okay. What is an objects log and types of objects log available?
Okay, so in a multi-threaded environment, when two or more threads try to access the same shared resource, then it can lead to dirty read, inconsistent behavior of the system, and many more issues. So Java brought the concept of locking to restrict the access to such shared resources. So basically in Java there are two types of lock: the object lock and the class lock. In a particular class you can have tens and hundreds of objects created for that particular class. For example, you have an animal class, you can have n number of objects for that particular class, a dog, fish, cow, many. So n number of objects can be present for a particular class. So every class will have only one single lock. Doesn't matter how many objects are created for that particular class, but every object will have one lock of its own. So whenever you want to modify the non-static method or non-static block of the code, you should always use the object lock, have the object lock, and then work upon it. But if you want to make sure that the static data is thread safe, then you have to capture the class level lock. So in that particular case, if there are 10 instances available at runtime, one instance will be available for modification, and all 9 have to wait. So this is class level lock. Even no modifications can be done in other instances or the objects also if the class level lock is taken.
When can an object reference be cast to an interface reference?
Okay. So an object is which can be given a memory. An interface cannot be given a memory with a new keyword. So if in case you have an object who is implementing all the undefined methods of an interface, in that case only you can cast your object reference to an interface reference. For example, if animal is an interface having some unimplemented methods, which is actually implemented in a dog class, then only you can do animal A equals to new dog, else you cannot.
Which class is extended by all other classes?
So the object class is a super class of all the classes. It is not explicitly defined like animal extends object or dog extends object, but it is by default. So by default, each and every class in Java has a super class called as object. It is the root of the hierarchy.
What restrictions are placed on method overloading?
Okay, so for method overloading, the first, or the static polymorphism, the first thing is that has to be in the same class. There should not be any child-parent relationship. Secondly, the name of the method should be same, but you can have different number of parameters, type of parameters, or order of parameters. So method overloading only occurs when the name of the method is same, but there is difference in the number of, type, and order of the parameters. But the return type does not create any difference, as it is not a part of method signature. So just changing the return type and thinking this will overload the Java method in Java, it will not happen. Rather, it will give you a compile time exception that duplicate methods are present in the class. So these are the restrictions placed on overloading.
Okay, so tell me about the restrictions that are placed on method overriding.
Okay, so method overloading, that was static binding, that was done on the same class, but method overriding, that is dynamic polymorphism, has to be in the child and parent relationship. There should be minimum two classes. One has to have an overridden method and one has to be having the overriding method. They cannot be in the same class, else the duplicate method in the same class will be found. The next rule is the visibility. The overriding method in the child should not reduce the excess modifier of the overridden method. That means if the parent has a method defined as public, then you cannot reduce the visibility in the child class to private protected or any package protected. So you cannot reduce the visibility. While the opposite you can do is accessibility. The opposite is okay. If the overridden method is defined as protected, then your child can override the method with public or protected. So that is fine. You can increase the visibility, but you cannot decrease the visibility. That is one of the rule of visibility in overriding. Then type of method, the private, static and final methods cannot be overridden in Java. The private will not be visible to child. Static will be the class level, and the final methods are meant to be not to be overridden the child. So these three types of methods should not be overridden. The return type, that is the covariant return type. You can initially with Java 1.5, before Java 1.5, you just have to make sure that while overriding the return type should be same. But after Java 1.5, some leniency has been given. You can change the return type in the same direction. That means while narrowing down from parent to child, you can narrow down the return type. For example, if the return type is parent, you can give a return type as child, but not in the opposite direction. So the direction should be same. If you are going towards the child, then the return type should also go towards the subclass of that particular return type, not towards the parent of it. And lastly, the important restriction to be placed on the method overriding is the exception. If the superclass is not declaring any exception, then the child can only declare unchecked or runtime exceptions, but not the checked exception, else the compile time exception will occur. If the parent throws an exception, then the child can only throw the same or the child exception. This is same as if you're going down towards the child, the exception should also go in the same direction. You can either throw the same or the child of it in the child class, but not the parent of it. And you can also throw any runtime exception. Runtime exception does not give you any problem, but not any new checked exception. It will again give you a compile time exception. And if a superclass declares an exception, it can be a possibility that subclass does not want to declare an exception. No compile time exception will occur. So that was all about restrictions placed on the method overriding.
Okay. What is transient variable?
Okay, so transient variable, as discussed earlier, is a variable being defined and used in the serialization process. When you don't want to save a particular value in a file during serialization, you can use the transient keyword. The utility, I have used such kind of transient variables in my POJOs when I don't want to save the password, the connection strings and such sensitive things to any file or the database. Then I have used a transient keyword to prevent storing that particular variable value into the database or the file. The JVM, whenever comes across such kind of keyword, is going to ignore the value and say the default type. So if it is string, it will store null, and if it is integer, it will store 0. So the default value is going to be stored rather than storing the real value of that particular sensitive transient variable.
So can you please share your screen and write a program to return a list of all even numbers that are greater than 5 given in the list?
Sure. So I can create a demo class. I'm going to create a main method. Here I'm going to take a list of numbers, integers, and in that list I'm going to add some numbers. Now I need to write a code to do two things. First, fetch those numbers who are even, and secondly, fetch those numbers who are greater than 5. So it should be an even number greater than 5, that is, I think 6, 8 and 12. So for that I'm going to print, I'm going to open a stream and I'm going to filter all those values of x such that x percentile 2 equals to 0, that will make sure it is even, and x should be greater than 5. So these conditions is the required condition, and at the end I'm going to collect it all as collectors.aslist or toList. And let's see if it prints 6, 8 and 12. So it prints 6, 8 and 12. So this is how it is. So that was all about the questions that is being asked in the Accenture for the first round. If you want us to cover the second part of the second round of the Accenture interview questions, then you have to let me know in the comment section. I'll fetch some questions that have been asked in the second round for the Accenture interviews. And also, if you want us to keep on making such database of company based interview questions, then also let us know in the comment section. Then we will fetch all such company based interview questions from our team. Thank you.